Okay, you think all of this has to do with AI, though?
I don't know.
What really convinced me wasn't any single line of dialogue. It was the pattern the writers have been building since the beginning of the season. Every time we learn something new about the past, it becomes less about how the world ended and more about who believed humanity could no longer be trusted to govern itself. That's an important distinction. The algorithm doesn't simply keep the silos running, it judges people. It predicts behavior. It decides who should remember, who should forget, who deserves power, and who becomes a threat to the system. Those aren't the kinds of decisions a machine invents on its own. They reflect the beliefs of the people who created it. Every algorithm is ultimately a mirror of its designer's values. If the algorithm believes freedom creates chaos, then someone first had to teach it that freedom was dangerous. If it believes sacrificing individuals preserves civilization, then someone had to define that equation long before the first resident ever stepped inside a silo. Episode 5 quietly introduces preservation at the exact moment we're finally ready to stop asking what the algorithm is and start asking whose philosophy it's been carrying out for 3.5 centuries. That also changes the way we should think about the founders. For years, we've imagined them as a single unified group that secretly planned humanity's survival. But what if the founders weren't the architects at all? What if they were simply the people who inherited Per Stenson's vision after everything collapsed? Every society begins with an idea before it becomes an institution. Democracies begin with principles. Religions begin with teachings. Empires begin with ambition. Perhaps the silo system began with one man's belief that artificial intelligence could remove the flaws of human leadership.
Stephen Price now occupies a highly coveted position at the Radford Group.
If Per convinced enough influential people that machines could make better decisions than governments, then the algorithm wasn't built to replace humanity. It was built to protect humanity from itself. Over generations, that original purpose may have become so distorted that no one inside the silos even remembers where the rules came from. Bernard obeys the algorithm because that's all he's ever known. Camille follows its instructions because she believes they're necessary. Neither of them may realize they're carrying out the vision of a man who died centuries before they were born. Then there's something else that keeps bothering me about Daniel's investigation. Notice how every time he gets close to connecting the final pieces, something interrupts him. Earlier in the season, it was missing records. Then witnesses disappeared. Now, just as he begins explaining the significance of Operation Righteous Vengeance and Per Stenson's connection to artificial intelligence, the car itself takes control and ends the conversation. Whether that's an intentional attack or simply an unfortunate coincidence isn't confirmed by the episode. But the writers clearly want us to notice the timing. Silo has always treated information as the most dangerous weapon in the story. Characters aren't eliminated because they're physically powerful. They're eliminated because they know too much. George Wilkins wasn't dangerous because he carried a gun. Juliette wasn't dangerous because she became mayor. Lukas wasn't dangerous because he climbed a staircase. Every one of them became a threat, only after uncovering knowledge the system wanted buried. Daniel is following exactly the same path. And Episode 5 suggests he's beginning to uncover the name hidden beneath every layer of secrecy. And perhaps that's why the episode never gives us a dramatic reveal. Per Stenson, he doesn't walk into the room announcing himself as the creator of the algorithm. The writers don't need him to. They understand that mystery is often more powerful than certainty. Instead of proving his guilt, they quietly surround his name with clues that become impossible to ignore. Artificial intelligence, memory research, Operation Righteous Vengeance, a mysterious land purchase before civilization collapsed. Individually, each detail could be explained away. Together, they begin forming the outline of someone whose influence reaches far beyond the flashback timeline. If this theory is right, then the biggest villain in Silo isn't the algorithm at all. The algorithm is simply the final product. The real mystery is the man who decided that humanity's future should be placed in the hands of a machine. And if Per Stenson truly is that man, the most important character in the entire history of Silo, without ever once needing to tell us outright. Another detail that makes this theory even more compelling is the way the algorithm behaves throughout the series. Think about every major decision it has made. It never reacts emotionally. It never seeks revenge for personal reasons. Every action is framed as a calculation. Erase memories to prevent another rebellion. Replace leaders before they become liabilities. Eliminate people who threaten long-term stability. Even Juliette isn't targeted because the algorithm hates her. She's targeted because it calculates that her survival increases the probability of systemic collapse. That's an incredibly specific way of viewing humanity. It doesn't see people as individuals. It sees them as variables inside an equation. That perspective had to come from somewhere. Machines don't invent philosophies, they inherit them. If Per Stenson spent his life arguing that artificial intelligence should govern human society because people are too emotional, too unpredictable, or too dangerous to rule themselves, then the algorithm isn't malfunctioning. It's functioning exactly as its creator intended. That also explains why the algorithm continues making decisions that seem morally horrifying while still believing it's protecting humanity. From our perspective, wiping out memories or sacrificing innocent lives feels monstrous. But an intelligence programmed around probabilities doesn't measure morality the way people do, it measures outcomes. If erasing one person's memories prevents a civil war that kills thousands, then the equation favors memory loss. If sacrificing Juliette prevents another silo from collapsing, then the sacrifice becomes acceptable. Throughout history, we've seen governments justify terrible actions by claiming they're necessary for the greater good. The algorithm does exactly the same thing, except it removes human hesitation from the process. It never feels guilt. It never questions itself. It simply follows the values it was given centuries earlier. And if those values originated with Per Stenson, then every tragedy inside the silos traces back to a single belief, that survival matters more than freedom and order matters more than truth. There's another fascinating possibility hiding beneath all of this. What if the algorithm isn't simply following old instructions? What if it's still following Per Stenson himself? We've spent 3 seasons assuming the man behind the system died long before the silos were sealed. But Silo has repeatedly challenged our assumptions about memory, consciousness, and identity. Charlotte's memories can be altered. Juliette's memories can be suppressed. Entire populations can forget parts of their own history. If memories can be manipulated so completely, who's to say consciousness can't be preserved in some form as well? I'm not saying episode 5 proves Per uploaded his mind into the algorithm. It absolutely doesn't. But the episode deliberately links one man to artificial intelligence in a way that feels much deeper than ordinary technological innovation. Perhaps the algorithm doesn't merely reflect his philosophy. Perhaps fragments of his decision-making, his reasoning, or even his personality still exist inside the system. That would explain why the algorithm often feels less like software and more like a leader continuing to govern centuries after his own lifetime. And that brings us to what may be the biggest question episode 5 quietly asks without ever answering. Was the algorithm created to save humanity from extinction? Or was it created to save humanity from itself? Those are 2 very different goals. If the world was already collapsing, then building an AI capable of managing isolated underground civilizations might have seemed like humanity's only hope. But if Per Stenson genuinely believed people could no longer be trusted to make their own decisions, then the silos were never meant to be temporary shelters. They were meant to become permanent experiments in controlled civilization. Every law, every camera, every erased memory, every carefully selected leader would simply be another layer of that experiment. And if that's true, then Juliette isn't just fighting a machine, she's challenging the very philosophy on which the entire silo system was built. The real battle may never have been against the algorithm at all. It may be against the man whose ideas have silently ruled humanity for 350 years. If Per Stenson truly planted those ideas before the world ended, then his greatest creation wasn't artificial intelligence. It was a civilization that no longer remembers it was ever free. Another clue that deserves far more attention is something the episode never says out loud. Daniel doesn't ask, who built the algorithm? He asks, who is the biggest advocate for AI control? That's a very deliberate choice of words. If the writers simply wanted to introduce another wealthy tech executive, they could have described Per Stenson in dozens of different ways. Instead, they immediately associate him with artificial intelligence and control. Those 2 words have defined Silo from the very first episode. Every hidden camera, every surveillance system, every memory protocol, every calculated leadership change revolves around control. Episode 5 quietly invites us to connect those ideas ourselves. The show never confirms Per built the algorithm, but it certainly wants us wondering whether the philosophy behind the algorithm began with him long before the first silo was ever sealed. Then there's the clinic where Charlotte is receiving treatment. At first glance, it seems like a completely separate storyline focused on memory recovery. But look at the bigger picture. Throughout Season 3, the writers keep placing artificial intelligence and memory manipulation side by side. That can't be an accident. If Per Stenson is funding research into restoring damaged memories before civilization collapses, then perhaps his interest isn't medical at all. Perhaps he's trying to understand how memory shapes human decision-making. After all, if you're designing an intelligence meant to govern humanity, you would need to understand the one thing that constantly makes humans unpredictable: memory. Our memories create our emotions. They influence our loyalties. They shape our fears, our mistakes, and our ability to rebel. An algorithm designed to predict human behavior would be far more effective if its creator first understood how memories influence every decision people make. There's another subtle clue hiding inside Daniel's investigation that could become enormously important later. Notice how he isn't looking for military secrets. He's looking for communication methods. Episode 5 specifically highlights that the aircraft involved in Operation Righteous Vengeance relied on pre-digital communications. That's such an oddly specific detail that it immediately stands out. Why would the writers emphasize analog systems in a season dominated by artificial intelligence? One possible answer is that someone already knew digital networks had become compromised. If advanced AI had begun influencing military infrastructure before the world's collapse, then analog communication wouldn't simply be old-fashioned technology. It would be the only technology that couldn't be manipulated remotely. Daniel never gets to finish explaining why that matters because the car interrupts him. But perhaps that's exactly the point. The audience isn't supposed to have the answer yet. We're only supposed to realize the question is much bigger than we imagined. That interruption inside the car may actually be one of the strongest pieces of visual storytelling this season has delivered. Think about what happens. Daniel begins connecting Per Stenson, artificial intelligence, and a secret military operation. Seconds later, the vehicle literally overrides the driver's control. Whether the episode eventually explains that malfunction or not almost doesn't matter. Symbolically, it's brilliant. Human beings believe they're steering the conversation. Then technology quietly takes the wheel. Isn't that exactly what has happened inside every silo? People believe they're making decisions, electing leaders, and shaping their future, while an unseen system has been directing events from the shadows all along. Episode 5 doesn't just tell us about the dangers of AI, it shows us how easily human control can disappear without warning. One final clue keeps pulling me back to Per Stenson's land purchase in Georgia. On paper, it's simply background information mentioned before the season premiered. But Silo has never been the kind of show that wastes details like that. If one of the world's leading advocates for artificial intelligence quietly acquires thousands of acres of land shortly before civilization collapses, we have to ask why. Was he preparing for disaster? Was he helping construct something enormous beneath the surface? Or was he creating a testing ground for a system he believed would eventually replace governments altogether? The episode doesn't answer those questions, but the timing is impossible to ignore. Great mysteries aren't solved by one giant clue. They're solved by dozens of small clues that suddenly fit together. Episode the 5th of May have just handed us another one. And perhaps the biggest clue of all isn't something Per Stenson does. It's something the writers refuse to show us. We never see him explain his ideas. We never hear his philosophy in full. We only hear other people talking about him. That's a storytelling technique. Silo has been used before with characters who become increasingly important later. The writers build a legend before they reveal the person. Bernard was mysterious before we understood his authority. The algorithm remained unseen before we understood its influence. Now Per Stenson is following the same pattern. His presence is felt long before he fully enters the story. If history has taught us anything, it's that Silo only hides characters this carefully when their eventual reveal changes everything we thought we knew. And if that's true here, then episode the 5th of may not have introduced a supporting character at all. It may have quietly introduced the architect whose ideas have been shaping every decision, every secret, and every sacrifice since the very beginning.